Every gardener confronts the challenges of pests and chemicals. But what if the true battle isn't against insects themselves, but rather against imperceptible signals that only they can detect? Decades ago, a scientist from the United States Department of Agriculture uncovered that insects locate plants by frequency, not scent, targeting only the vulnerable ones. Today's colossal $60 billion pesticide industry deliberately conceals this fact. Yet even a simple copper coil possesses the ability to neutralize a plant's insect signal, effectively making your garden invisible to pests without requiring any hazardous poisons. The foundational evidence for this began with Dr. Philip Callahan's microscopic observations, and it has the potential to fundamentally alter your understanding of what nurtures your soil. At the pinnacle of his career, Dr. Philip Callahan was deeply embedded within the USDA's Southern Grain Insect Research Laboratory in Tifton, Georgia. While his official designation was entomologist, his expertise extended far beyond the realm of insect studies. Callahan had received training as a radio technician with the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II, where he mastered the art of tracking unseen signals across European skies. This wartime experience, deciphering the language of radio waves, would profoundly influence the inquiries he pursued in the laboratory many years later. Callahan's inquisitiveness was relentless. In the 1960s, he commenced examining insect antennae under potent microscopes, seeking explanations for how pests managed to locate their targets. What he observed genuinely startled him. The architecture of moth and beetle antennae was not random. Instead, it resembled the meticulously configured arrays utilized in radar technology. Extended, repetitive shafts adorned with ridges and spines precisely spaced at regular intervals. To Callahan, this was more than just a biological peculiarity. It appeared to be a product of meticulous engineering. He subsequently published micrographs in technical bulletins, inviting fellow scientists to scrutinize these structures more closely. Years of intensive research culminated in a groundbreaking hypothesis. Insect antennae might function as dielectric waveguides, capable of detecting electromagnetic signals far beyond the capabilities of ordinary smell or touch. In his 1975 publication, he detailed how these intricate structures could be tuned to infrared frequencies, wavelengths invisible to the human eye but ubiquitous in the natural environment. He posited that insects were not merely sampling the air for plant odors. Instead, they might be actively scanning for something far more profound: the distinct energy signature of a living plant. Within the USDA, Callahan's unconventional ideas initially met with skepticism. Nevertheless, his formidable technical credentials made him difficult to dismiss. Throughout his distinguished career, he authored over 100 scientific papers and 10 books, seamlessly bridging the disciplines of entomology, radiophysics, and the study of biological communication. He dedicated several years to the Insect Attractants Behavior and Basic Biology Research Laboratory in Gainesville, Florida, consistently urging his colleagues to reevaluate their understanding of how insects truly navigate their surroundings. The evidence, Callahan adamantly maintained, was perpetually before them, intricately etched into the microscopic particulars of every moth's antenna. For him, these structures served a purpose far beyond mere olfaction. They were attuned to a concealed world of signals that modern science was only beginning to acknowledge. His observations compelled the entire field to transcend traditional chemical explanations and contemplate the profound possibility that plants and insects communicated on a frequency that no one had previously bothered to measure. Infrared cameras have unveiled a concealed world within the garden. A flourishing plant's leaves emit heat in a consistent, uniform flow, forming an unbroken energy field. However, under duress, this pattern fractures. Drought, disease, or nutrient deficiencies disrupt the plant's metabolic processes and water transportation, resulting in a mosaic of disparate hot and cool regions. This is not merely an abstract concept. Agricultural research facilities employ thermal imaging to identify water-stressed crops days before the onset of wilting. A healthy plant's infrared signature appears smooth and homogeneous, whereas a struggling one presents a mottled appearance, with irregular bursts of heat across its leaf surfaces. Dr. Philip Callahan observed these discrepancies and perceived more than just variations in temperature. He firmly believed that the distinction between healthy and ailing plants extended well beyond thermal differences. In his estimation, a robust plant emits a coherent, high-energy signal, a form of biological interference that merges seamlessly into the ambient background. Insects, he argued, are unable to discern this particular signal. They fly past unheeding, incapable of singling out the plant from its surroundings. However, when a plant's vitality diminishes, its energy field enters a state of disarray. Its infrared emissions become noisy and chaotic, akin to a radio struggling to tune between stations. For a foraging insect, this constitutes a clear beacon, an unequivocal indication that the plant is vulnerable and ripe for consumption. Contemporary entomologists have scrutinized how insects utilize sensory cues to pinpoint their targets. The prevailing consensus is that most pests rely on olfactory and visual contrasts. Nevertheless, some species, such as fire beetles or specific parasitic wasps, demonstrate the capacity to detect subtle alterations in infrared radiation. Dr. Ringcard, a leading expert in insect behavior, notes that while the primary cues are predominantly chemical, insects exhibit sensitivity to temperature variations and may exploit these to home in on stressed plants. The notion that insects can decipher intricate patterns of infrared energy remains a contentious subject. What is undeniably evident, however, is that plants under stress broadcast their distress in ways perceptible to both cameras and, potentially, to the organisms seeking them out. The distinction between coherent and chaotic energy is not merely an academic exercise. It provides a novel framework for contemplating plant health. If a plant's distress signal is what attracts pests, then obscuring or rectifying that signal could render the plant effectively undetectable. This viewpoint paves the way for interventions that do not rely on noxious chemicals, but instead focus on restoring the plant's intrinsic energy field. And it prompts the intriguing question of whether a simple piece of copper might be sufficient to fundamentally alter the dynamics of pest management. A slug navigates towards the periphery of a garden bed, its antennae methodically sweeping the soil in search of its next meal. Just ahead, a segment of copper wire lies partially embedded in the moist earth. As the slug makes contact, its body completes an electrical circuit, bridging the gap between the copper and the damp soil, thus forging a natural connection. A voltage meter affixed to the wire registers a surge, ranging from half a volt to 1 volt, generated by the electrochemical interaction between the copper, the slug's mucus, and the soil's electrolytes. This is neither a deception nor wishful thinking. The underlying chemistry is fundamental. Copper and slug mucus combine to form a galvanic cell, a principle identical to that powering a battery. Within mere seconds, the slug recoils. Its withdrawal is abrupt and unmistakable, often occurring in less than 2 seconds from the initial contact to its retreat. This reaction remains consistent across numerous repeated trials, with even the most audacious slugs abandoning their trajectory after encountering the wire. Soil chemists have meticulously quantified this phenomenon in controlled experiments, precisely documenting voltage curves and withdrawal times. On average, slugs divert their path within 1.5 to 2 seconds and rarely venture a second attempt at crossing. The effect is tangible, quantifiable, and, critically, reproducible. Unlike sprays or pellets that leave no discernible evidence of their action, the copper wire provides clear, irrefutable proof that anyone can verify. The mild electric jolt is benign to the plant, but sufficient to deter the slug, creating a living barrier using nothing more than a scrap of metal and the moisture naturally present in the soil. For skeptics, the setup is straightforward. A live slug, a clean length of copper, a basic multimeter, and a stopwatch. Each time, the outcome is consistent. A live demonstration of physics in action, and a force field that no pest dares to violate. Every experiment requires a defined starting point. On the morning of the initial trial, 6 garden plots, 3 equipped with copper coils and 3 left untreated, were assessed for 2 fundamental metrics: Brix levels and voltage. Brix, the established standard for measuring plant sugars and dissolved solids, was determined using a handheld refractometer. Each collected leaf sample was juiced, and a single drop was placed onto the glass. The control group registered an average of 7.2 Brix, with values ranging from 6.8 to 7.6. The coil group exhibited an average of 7.3, spanning from 7.0 to 7.7. These figures, while modest, established the baseline for the entirety of the experiment. Voltage readings were acquired using a digital multimeter, with leads pressed against the plant stem and into the moist soil. All plots recorded values between 38 and 46 millivolts, showing no significant difference between the treated and untreated beds. Soil pH, moisture content, and sunlight exposure were meticulously documented for each plot to eliminate the influence of confounding variables. These initial measurements indicated no discernible advantage for the coil group. There was no enhanced sugar content, no elevated voltage, and no immediate sign of an effect. A summary chart concisely captured the averages and ranges for each measured parameter. A side-by-side comparison of the Brix readings revealed only minor variations, well within the margin of error typically observed for garden-grown vegetables. The voltage data mirrored this pattern, displaying a tight clustering across all 6 beds with no notable outliers. This preliminary snapshot, taken prior to any intervention, would serve as the foundational reference for all subsequent comparisons. The experimental protocol mandated weekly follow-up assessments, tracking Brix levels, voltage, pest counts, and leaf coloration over the subsequent month. By adhering to rigorous quantitative methods and repeatable procedures, the experiment clearly delineated the boundary between empirical observation and speculative intuition. Any assertions regarding pest resistance or plant vigor would unequivocally need to withstand the scrutiny of this established baseline, firmly grounded in measurement, not conjecture. In Paris, 1923, Georges Lakhovsky stood amidst rows of geraniums at the Jardin des Plantes, copper wire in hand. His experiment was remarkably simple. Plants afflicted with crown gall tumors received no medication or chemical treatment. Instead, a single loop of copper wire, incomplete at one end, was simply slipped around the plant's stem. Lakhovsky referred to this as an oscillating circuit, inspired by his belief that every living cell vibrated like a minuscule radio. According to his personal accounts, the outcomes were spectacular. The geraniums adorned with copper coils not only survived, but also recuperated, while the untreated plants withered and perished. News of this demonstration rapidly disseminated throughout French scientific circles and eventually found its way into the press, with headlines hinting at the dawn of a new era in plant health. In his publication, Liaisons à la vie, Lakhovsky presented diagrams and descriptions, alongside patent applications detailing the coil's design. This was consistently a simple, unclosed loop, always featuring a discernible gap. These foundational documents, preserved within the archives of the Bibliothèque nationale de France, conspicuously display the distinctive form of the Lakhovsky coil. Almost a century later, that identical configuration, a single, open copper loop, remains central to every textbook on electroculture. The design has undergone minimal alteration since those initial Parisian gardens, carrying its historical blueprint into contemporary usage. A century separates Lakhovsky's original copper loop from the coils utilized by today's gardeners, yet its design has seen negligible modification. The initial schematics from the 1920s illustrate a solitary wire wrapped just once around the stem, invariably with an intentional break, never forming a complete circle. This open interstice is more than a mere peculiarity. It is its defining characteristic. Lukovsky identified it as an oscillating circuit, engineered to facilitate the bidirectional flow of energy, mirroring the mechanism by which radio antennas capture atmospheric signals. Contemporary electroculture guidelines continue to advocate for this precise geometric arrangement. A copper loop sized to fit loosely around a plant's base, featuring a gap no wider than a pencil. Whether delicately placed around a geranium in Paris or anchored in the ground next to a tomato plant in California, the fundamental principle persists. The open coil is neither a product of the internet age nor a contemporary marketing contrivance. It is a direct descendant of a nearly forgotten experiment, a design perpetuated through archaic patents, translated instructional guides, and successive periods of trial and error. This unbroken continuity is not merely historical minutiae. It is why current DIY instructions still mirror past practices, and why the subsequent step, constructing your own coil, follows a design unchanged since the first copper wire encircled a living stem. The global market for pesticides exceeds $60 billion annually, signifying not merely a peripheral interest, but a formidable financial engine reliant on gardeners and farmers repeatedly purchasing chemical treatments season after season. The rationale is starkly simple. You spray to eliminate an insect, yet the toxic substance does not cease its effect at the mere pest. It inflicts stress upon the plant, diminishing its inherent electrical potential and compromising its natural defenses. This stress alters the plant's chemical composition and energetic field, thereby rendering it more attractive to pests. The subsequent influx of insects is not coincidental. It is a direct repercussion of the preceding application. Industry analyses and agricultural extension reports tacitly acknowledge this cyclical pattern. Each application of pesticide diminishes the plant's inherent resilience. As immunity wanes, the plant emits an intensified distress signal, whether through volatile organic compounds, compromised cell walls, or shifts in its energetic patterns. More pests arrive, drawn to this vulnerable target. The industry's proposed remedy invariably involves increased product consumption, a novel formulation, a heightened dosage, a subscription for the latest mixture. This encapsulates the pesticide treadmill. 5 repetitive steps: spray, stress, signal, infestation, repeat. The system does not reward robust plants, rather it monetizes debilitated ones. The more one combats, the more one procures. For decades, this cycle has been presented as progress. In reality, it constitutes a trap, binding growers to dependency, depleting their finances, and leaving their crops progressively weaker with each successive round. The true inquiry is not whether the system functions, but for whose benefit it genuinely operates. A single length of copper wire is all that is required to test this theory. For most garden vegetables, a solid copper wire of 12 to 14 gauge is optimal. Cut a segment long enough to encircle the plant's base loosely, approximately 1.5 to 2 times the stem's circumference. Form it into a loop, but avoid completely closing the circle. Leave an opening approximately the width of a pencil. This gap is crucial. It permits the loop to function as an antenna, rather than a closed circuit. Gently slide the loop over the stem, positioning it just above the soil, or press its ends into the earth adjacent to the plant. There is no need to strip the wire or incorporate any power source. The setup is completed in less than a minute. To monitor the outcomes, a refractometer becomes the instrument of choice. On day 7, snip a leaf, extract a droplet of sap onto the glass, and record the Brix reading. Repeat this procedure on day 14 and day 30. If the coil is effective, these values should ascend, occasionally by 2 or 3 points within a single month. Independent practitioners, ranging from home gardeners to small-scale farmers, have documented their findings in field journals and online forums. Some observe leaves developing a richer green hue, while others report pest damage diminishing to almost zero. For those desiring objective data, voltage readings can be acquired at the same intervals using a digital multimeter pressed against both the stem and the soil. Safety protocols are straightforward. Keep the coil out of reach of children and pets, and refrain from using treated or coated wire. The methodology is as ancient as Likovsky's original diagrams, yet the measurements are entirely contemporary. Each reading serves as a checkpoint, substantiating that a modest piece of copper can alter a plant's narrative, one loop at a time. Presently, pesticide usage remains at near-record levels, despite accumulating evidence that plant vitality, not chemical agents, dictates resilience. As organic sales surge and anxieties regarding chemical residues heighten, the true contention lies in how we define a thriving ecosystem. Occasionally, the most transformative instrument is not a novel technology, but rather the rediscovery of inherent natural wisdom. Which signal will your garden transmit? Share your perspectives in the comments section.